What is leadership? That's what I want to share today. And of course, we're taking it from this book, Launching the Leadership Revolution. I got it here on my Kindle. So I want to share a couple of things. What is leadership? That's a pretty broad question, and there's so many different answers to that. In this book, I want to share a few quotes that they offer of different leadership gurus. One of them is Gary Willis. He said, leadership is mobilizing others toward a goal shared by the leader and followers. That's a pretty good definition. Um, and let's see, another one is James C. Hunter. We define leadership as a skill of influencing people to work enthusiastically toward goals identified as being for the common good. That's another one that I think is pretty good. However, I think they kind of missed the mark. In reading this book, um, they we're going to go through. They're going to define here a little bit what leadership is, and I agree with what they're saying. It's really hard to define. There's so many different definitions. One of the good ones that I think, and I've read this book, The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership by John C. Maxwell. Great book. If you haven't read that, I would recommend getting that and reading it. And in this Launching Leadership Revolution, they quote John C. Maxwell from this book. And John C. Maxwell says, and I think this is one of the best definitions of leadership, and it's simple. Leadership is influence. Nothing more, nothing less. And I agree with that. Leadership is influence. John C. Maxwell says people have so many misconceptions about leadership. When they hear that someone has an impressive title or an assigned leadership position, they assume that he is a leader. Sometimes that's true, but titles don't have much value when it comes to leading. I would agree with that. True leadership cannot be awarded, appointed, or assigned. It comes only from influence, and that can't be mandated. It must be earned. I agree with that. I remember when in my career, when I was wanting to climb that corporate ladder, my manager said, "We're not going to give you a promotion until you can have influence." Is basically what he said. It wasn't the exact words. He said, "We need the team to follow you before we actually promote you." And I said, "Okay, we'll do it." And I did that. Too many people get promoted and they think that just because they have a title, they're the leader. And in my opinion, that is the wrong way to lead, the wrong way to manage people. You have to have influence with people. And to have influence with people, you got to have trust. And trust is a big thing. And I know that they're going to talk more about this in the future about that trust and your character and all these things. Okay. Um, this is another quote from Orrin Woodward and Chris Brady, who wrote this book. They quote this 19th century preacher and author Albert Barnes, who says, influence is that a man's known talent, learning, character, experience, and position on which a presumption is based that what he holds is true and that what he proposes is wise. So people have to know the person enough and trust them enough to be able to follow them and know that they're leading them in the right direction. Um, this is the last thing I'm going to read out of this book on this video. Leadership is the influence of others in a productive, vision-driven direction and is done through the example, conviction, and character of the leader. I think that is the best definition of leadership. Okay, leadership truly is has to be productive. You got to have a vision-driven direction, and it has to be done by example. The leader needs to be out in front, not pushing by behind. Say, you guys go do this, do as I say, not as I do. Right? We've all heard that, and so that is leadership in its essence, in my opinion. And so, if you don't have influence, basically, like John C. Maxwell says, then you're just going for a walk in the park because nobody's following you, right? With nobody following you, you're just going for a walk in the park. And so, thank you for listening. If you have questions, comments, please make those make those comments. I'd love to hear what your definition of leadership is. If there's, you know, books or things you've read that you really like, put in the comments, share it. If you haven't already, make sure you follow me And we'll that's our leadership video for today. And that is what is leadership. And have a great day.